Welcome to A Dad's Path, where we navigate the heart and science of parenting. Each episode, we tackle issues that dads everywhere face and deliver actions you can take right away. Join us as we uncover the balancing act of raising resilient, loving kids. Visit us at adadspath.com to learn more. Ready for the journey? Let's begin.
Hello and welcome to another episode of A Dad's Path podcast. I'm Will Bronstein. Today we're here with Dr. Kimberling. Dr. Kim has been a professional counselor for 40 years and married to his wife Nancy for 53. Dr. Kim's marriage wisdom is the result of years of experience, both personally and professionally. So there's a lot there. Dr. Kim is the president and co-founder of Awesome Marriage. That's awesomemarriage.com. And Awesome Marriage has helped and continues to help thousands of couples build an awesome marriage. Like the name suggests, you can read his book, a couple books, 7 Secrets of an Awesome Marriage and 14 Keys to Lasting Love, for an in-depth look at some of his most valuable marriage wisdom. You can tune in each week to the Awesome Marriage podcast for great insights on marriage if you like listening. And if you just want to get one tip a day, receive one practical step you can take to work towards an awesome marriage, you can sign up for his One Thing email. And this is all on awesomemarriage.com. I'll put that in the show notes so you guys can just click on through. But Dr. Kim, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here.
Hey, thanks, Will. It is great to be here with you. I'm excited about what you're doing and how you're helping dads and families. And certainly that's a lot of my passion too, because if have awesome marriages, it usually carries over to the kids and helping the kids just grow up in the homes that God would have them to grow up in. So thank you for what you do.
Yeah, no, and likewise, I'm curious maybe to jump in. What inspired you to start Awesome Marriage or to just focus your career really on helping couples with marriages?
With marriage, I started out when I first started out in counseling a number of years ago. I worked with kids a lot. I loved working with kids. Just had a heart for helping them. And out of that, I think God showed me that, hey, you need to help these parents too, because you're doing a pretty good job with the kids. And then you're sending them back home into situations where the parents aren't as healthy and the kids are trying to get healthy. And so that kind of led me into starting to do more marriage counseling. And I saw that was, an area that I think God wanted me to be in, because I saw just what I thought, that as marriages got healthier, families got healthier, and it was a great place for kids to grow up. And so that was kind of the transition into helping couples build strong marriages.
Awesome. That makes a lot of sense. And out of curiosity, what does your typical session look like? Is it sort of one person speaking, the other person speaking, and then you kind of giving
Yeah. The one thing I love about what I do in the counseling room, Will, is that everybody that comes in is different, and it's never boring. It's never two people, the same thing. And so it depends on what the situation was. Some couples are in crisis. Maybe there's been an affair, maybe there's been porn, maybe there's a lot of the things that we see today in our culture. Maybe they're just wanting to work on communication or things like that. So it kind of depends what the situation, but I usually start out and I want to hear the first session. I want to hear from both of them. I want to know what they see the problem is. Is there a place we can connect there somewhere to try to get them at least started on the same page on something? And then from there, we either meet together. Sometimes I'll meet separate with each one time, just to more than anything, try to build that relationship and let each one of them know that I am for them and I am for the marriage. And I don't want either one of them to ever feel like I'm siding to one another. And I want them to tell me if they're feeling that. And so at that point, then we start working on whoever the presenting issue is. And sometimes we find that some of those roots go way back early in the marriage, or maybe even predate the marriage, and then trying to help them see why they're doing what they're doing and what God's plan is. And that as they seek that's going to be a plan that gives them the marriage that they both really want.
And you've been doing this for a long time. I know Awesome Marriage is 14 years old, but you've been in this industry for a long time, right?
I started counseling in 1983, so it's been a long time now. A lot of years. Learned a lot over the years.
Oh, I bet. And have you seen a change in terms of certain issues are becoming more prevalent than when you started, and maybe vice versa too? Were there issues that came up before more that are no longer as there?
I think obviously, as most people would say, social media has changed things a lot for us. The way to communicate, I think it's the reason we probably see more couples that where there's been an affair by one of them is because it's so easy to connect with someone now and to either openly or not. Just there's just all kinds of options people have. I think one of the things I've seen coming out of COVID is a lot of the couples that went into COVID pretty healthy seem to have come out of it healthy and used that time pretty well. The couples that were struggling going in, most of them came out worse. And so I think we've seen some things like that. Social media, COVID, something that none of us knew how to handle, certainly for ourselves and let alone our families. And then probably communication is something that's always been a problem. I mean, there's some things that you just know if you can help couples communicate, it's going to make a big difference because all of a sudden they are kind of feeling like they're on the same team instead of being, in separate corners trying to fight this deal out.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that's really important, having the feeling of partnership that you're partners, whereas it can be pretty easy, unfortunately, to get in this mode where you're kind of both independently working or fighting.
Exactly.
But, not always, you have the same intentions in mind. You're trying to help your kids, you're trying to raise a nice family. But if you're not treating your partner like a partner, it feels like it can easily just become almost contentious. You're on different pages a lot of the time.
Right.
And that's you go ahead.
No, just say the culture we live in doesn't help a lot right now. There's I've heard it called all different things, but it's a lot of ways it's an angry culture in so many ways, and it's so all that it's like we go out to work or place. There's not a lot of refuge, and so the refuge has got to be in our homes with our spouse and with our kids, and it's where we feel like we're loved and cared for and grow, and then we go out and fight whatever battles we got to fight in the world the next day.
Yeah.
And so making our marriage and our home life into that refuge makes all the difference. The people that do that, it makes it a lot easier to handle a lot of the other things that are going on in our world today.
That makes sense. And as you said, communication is a real big challenge. What do you find? What do you find? Like where that challenge comes from to start? Maybe like why is communication such a challenge? Particularly, probably more so with kids with couples with kids, I would think, but I could, correct me if I'm wrong there.
Yeah, I think time commitment's a lot of it. And I think we, for some reason, we don't listen really well. If I can get a couple just to do the simple exercise of really listening to each other, that means like with my wife, if Nancy's talking, I'm not thinking about what great thing I'm going to say as soon as she quits talking, that's going to win the argument or whatever's going on, that I'm really listening to her and then letting her know that, but kind of giving her some feedback. And so I think the more that we can understand each other and embrace our differences, I think a lot of times our differences pull us apart. And I believe God put us together with differences for a reason. I think it was so we can learn and grow. And honestly, I think if we were exactly the same, it'd probably get boring at some point. There's those differences. And so I think instead of fighting them, if we can turn around and embrace them, okay. It's interesting how sometimes, Will, that some couple will tell me, I liked it when we were dating that she was so organized and everything was in its place. And it was just nice. I never dated anyone like that. And now marriage, all of a sudden he thinks she's controlling because she's putting things in their place. So the things that he was attracted to going in can become something we have to deal with differently in marriage, and just helping couples navigate that. And how do we value it? How do we work things out? And how do we do it together?
And that makes, and a lot of it you think is are you saying is mindset, is kind of the mindset you have when you're listening to someone, when you're, what you used to like, you don't
Absolutely.
like. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's how we frame our spouse a lot. When the day we say I do, most of us are looking pretty good at our spouse. We're thinking, this person I want to spend the rest of my life with. I think she's beautiful. I think he's handsome. I like this and this and this about him. If somehow when we start either not fighting fair or the differences come out, we start framing the other person differently. And I think the more you can reframe your spouse as that person you fell in love with and see them through those eyes, or really see them through God's eyes, then I think it makes it easier to have healthier conversations, because if you look at that, this person brings value to my life and God intended that person to bring value, then I got to figure out where that is, because if I don't, I'm going to miss out on something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, having that faith, it sounds like, is a big part of that.
I think so too.
How do you view, when a couple is coming with you and saying, "Gosh, I don't know if this is worth it anymore. I don't know if the marriage is going to work. We know we want to potentially separate." I mean, are there cases where you say, "Okay, I think that's right," or how would you advise? And I know it probably depends on what the issue is in the couple, but yeah, how do you approach that?
I've never advised a couple to divorce. I feel that they've got to come to that decision on their own. There's times that I've said, like, if they're just fighting and it's just miserable and the kids are being affected, that we'll do a structured separation for a period of time while each one of them works on things and we kind of work on some things together. But I think what I want to do each time when this couple leaves after the first session, or any session really, is that they've got hope that things can be better than they are. And sometimes they just have lost sight of that. When you're fighting all the time and there's all this conflict, you don't really take the time to listen to each other. And so if I can get them in a situation where they can kind of reconnect back with what they wanted this to be in the beginning, talk about where it went off track, and then trying to heal that and to chart a new path for them. So I've had couples that come in just like the description you gave, Will, and leave with hope. And then it's usually, if they've gotten to that point, it's not going to be a 1 or 2 session deal. It's going to take time. It's going to take work. But I tell them, it's worth the work. I mean, if you start over somebody new, most likely you're going to have the same problems, or if you have different problems. You've always got to put the effort in if you're going to have a good marriage. And so I try to encourage them to try that. And a lot of times I do it. I think a constraint is to do it for your kids. That your kids deserve good parents. Your kids deserve you to have a marriage that they want to have when they get to that age. And so sometimes just they lose sight of that, I think, or think my kids would be better if he wasn't here or she wasn't here. And in reality, they're going to be better if you're both healthy and in this marriage together.
Yeah, I think that's right on. I mean, that really resonates. There's a saying, marriage is hard, divorce is hard, choose your hard. It's easy to be in your mind, say, "Oh, this will solve my problems," and no, it's going to create a whole new set of problems, and maybe that's right. But yeah.
Yeah, but if you have kids, you don't get rid of that problem. That person's you're having to work with that person with your kids and transfer kids and all those kind of things. So much better is if there's a way to work it out.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And how do you advise, dads? One thing I hear a lot is, we had an amazing relationship, and then kids came along and we both love our kids, but it's changed our relationship. My wife, my partner's not as fun, or they've changed, or whatever it is. And a lot of times that's true. Like, obviously, as a dads, we change. We're doing something new. Moms, they change. They're doing something new. But, how do you navigate that change together so you end up, again, as partners with the goal of being in a partnership, as opposed to, feeling contentious?
Yeah. I think what I try to get couples to do is realize there's a bunch of seasons in a marriage. In those early years with kids, where they're just needy. They need the mom usually and the dad to do things and to help them. And, there's times that they can't do anything for themselves. You got to change their diapers, you got to feed them, you got to do all these kind of things. And to help them see that that's a season that will change. And so how can we best connect during this season? Okay, we're both tired, baby's not sleeping, all those kind of things, but we can still just spend some time together, maybe after the baby's in bed, and maybe we just sit there and maybe don't say a whole lot. Maybe we just kind of just hang out together for a little bit, but just trying to find some point of connection then, and realize that when that season passes, there's going to be new opportunities and maybe more freedom to connect than you have during those times. Those are challenging, I think. I've had so many couples that would say their marriage was great until they had a child, and they didn't know how to make that adjustment. And they get so into the child and they forget about their marriage. And I think you can do that short term, but you can't do that long term. And so I think it's got, oh yeah, we still got a marriage. We've got to nurture through this, because you don't want to be one of those couples that when the last kid, leaves home, you look at each other and go, I don't even know your name. Who are you? And so you have to figure out through each one of those stages and seasons, how do we put our marriage where God would have us to?
Yeah, no, that makes. And so, how would you, working our way back here? You have a kid who's about to leave the house for school or whatever, for college. So they're moving out, and it's just going to be you and your partner, your spouse, and you do feel that separation. You do feel like, gosh, this is a stranger. How do you avoid that? So, like, what are the stages you're taking? During these tough seasons,
Right,
where it feels like there's no time to connect. Like, how do you recommend kind of facing that?
sure. I think there's things that we can do to connect. I think for Nancy and I, praying together has been a huge thing for our marriage from day one. Nancy was the one on our wedding night that said we need to pray. She had been mentored by a lady before we got married, and we took that seriously. And that didn't mean we had a perfect marriage. I mean, there were times we could have fought with the best of them. It just was not good, not healthy. But I think we always had that commonality of wanting to come back to pray, wanting to let God help our marriage, those kind of things. So I think it's as you go through that I think when I put God first and Nancy second, my life is so much better. She's happier. We fight less. And I think when I put God first, it's a lot easier to put her right behind God. Because I think if I'm doing the things God wants me to, well, He's going to want me to be a good husband. He's going to want me to be a good dad, and trusting that He will equip me to do that. And so I think as you go through the different seasons, looking for those opportunities to, okay, now the kids are old enough to spend the night with grandparents, or maybe to have a babysitter. So we got to get back to some date nights. I remember a time in our marriage early on when we were able to get a babysitter for the first time. Nancy looked forward to that all week. I mean, it was like, moms get tired of talking to little people all the time. They love them to death, but they really want to talk to an adult, and especially their husband. So putting those things back in, and I think you have to be real intentional about it, because it's not going to be the easiest thing to do. It's probably going to take a little bit of sacrifice on both your parts. And I think you can be creative. I've got couples that, the way it worked for probably 6 months, there's no way they could have dates in the evenings. So they did lunch dates, or they would, things like that. A couple of times they'd do a breakfast date, just something where the two of them got away and just could talk and catch up with each other and let each other know that, hey, this marriage is important.
That's profound. I like that. Those are good, good levels of advice. And going back to God for a second, or faith,
Sure.
what do you advise couples who have different levels of faith?
I think that happens a lot. I think in our marriage, Nancy certainly was stronger in her faith than I was for a long time. I'm catching up, but I think you're never at the same level. And so I think if if you have that same core value of faith is important to us, we do want to make this a part of our marriage. We may be at different stages, but just that's why I think praying together, things like that, reading the Bible together, which is so much easier now with like the YouVersion Bible. If you're familiar with that app, there's a lot of different little plans in it where you can pick it. Say you're struggling with communication. Well, there's a bunch of plans on communication, and it just gives you a chance to talk about things. I think so many times we put the problems we have in marriage on the back burner because there's so much in front of us. We got 3 kids and they're all in 3 sports, and we do this and that, and it's like, when do we have time to read the Bible together? Well, 1, you can make time, and 2, maybe you need to look at the busyness of your schedule a little bit also. But looking for those opportunities again to grow together in your faith. Sometimes it's a challenge if you maybe say, I've had couples where one maybe it was Catholic faith, one was Protestant faith, and so there were the core beliefs were there, but sometimes the way they got there were a little different. So those are things you need to talk about and work on.
Yeah, no, I mean, and what was the name of the app? I didn't quite catch that.
It's the Bible app, the YouVersion Bible app. It's It's great. We have a number, also marriage, we have a number of plans on it. I've got a number of plans. There's a lot of people would recognize if they go on there that have different reading plans, and they're usually from 3 to 5 to 7 days. There's something you can do quickly together. Most of the time you can do probably in 5 minutes or less as a couple. But it's a way, just looking for ways to connect that that are easy to do, I think helps people today. I used to ask people to read the Bible, and I'd say we'll start here or whatever, or they'd come back and they let the Bible fall open. They came in, fell in Leviticus, and they're talking about butchering cows on an altar, and they're going, "This isn't helping my marriage." I'm saying, "Yeah, probably not." So having a little guidance, I think, helps a lot. And it
That
helps
makes
you kind of solidify your value and talk about things. What do you think about that? What does that mean to you? What did it say to you? How does it say something to us as our marriage? And just be able to start some dialogue there.
Yeah, I think that's a wise advice, whether it's the Bible or whatever it is. But if you can find something to do together and then
Exactly.
hopefully a little bit active, as opposed to
Yeah.
just like reading, but discussing it. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think you can do that with a book. You can listen to a book on tape together, and stop and listen to it. Maybe you pick something out on communicating in marriage, and you just listen to it together. And probably there's going to be some questions along the way you can interact in. So there's a lot of resources out there if you'll just take the time to look at them. And we have a ton of resources on our Awesome Marriage website of couples of just helping in communication, and we have communication starters and just all kinds of things for just about every area of the marriage relationship.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. And you said something else that I think was, I want to kind of highlight, which is, if you and your partner are feeling too busy with all the kid stuff, like maybe you are too busy. And I think it's easy to get in that trap of, no, we need to do after school sports, then we need to do after school this and that and the other. And kids can get so over programmed. You think it's programmed, but it's really them being over programmed, and you can really feel it in your life, right? Like you're burning
Absolutely.
the fuse at both ends, and that's not sustainable. I think that's pretty important. I like that you brought that up. Yeah,
I do too. And I think most of that, sometimes you get pushback from kids. I've also had kids that when the parents say, okay, you're in 4 things now, you can only have 2 things a semester you're in. And the kids will go, oh, wow, I can go play with my friends in the neighborhood now because I don't have to go to practice every day of the week and things. So I think it is a couple deciding what's most important for your family and just having to monitor your kids. Kids, we've got to give our kids time to be kids. I think it helped me a lot when I realized that my son was not going to be a major leaguer. It's like, okay, we don't need to be playing on all these teams. He loves it. He played it in high school. He played some in college, but just that's great. But it didn't. I think we kind of changed our focus somewhat, and Nancy and I wanted to expose our kids to a lot of different things, whether it was sports or music or a lot of different things, and so once they were exposed, we kind of let them settle in on 1 or 2 things that they really wanted to focus on. My daughter was volleyball and piano, and that's what she loved and did all the way through high school. And so I think it's finding a couple of things your kids really do like that they're not, because a lot of them they're doing because 5 guys in the class are doing it. And so I want to be on this team, Dad, or something like that. And they maybe not really want to. You can tell when they're out on the basketball court that no, I like soccer a lot better. I'm having to do things that I don't feel comfortable doing. So just having those conversations, I think, is good. Yeah. And your kids will follow. They may bucket a little bit, but I think once they see that things are their schedule's a little less hectic, there's a little less stress there, I think they're going to really embrace it too.
Yeah, no, I think I'm sure you're right. I'm sure you're right. And I love the strategy of saying, let's cast a really wide net. You tell me what you're interested in and we'll try it. And let's try a bunch of things. And then you figure out what you like and let's invest in those. Let's invest more time in those. As opposed to, it's easy to put it in your head and say, oh, my kid's going to do X or Y or Z because I did X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, exactly. I had a lady one time, Will, and this was before we had calendars on our phones. She had a big whiteboard thing in her van, and it had the kids' schedule on there. She had 5 kids. Each kid had a different color. And basically Monday through Friday, they lived in the van. And so I asked her one time to bring that in, and it was amazing. The kids were in so many things, I can't even tell you how many things they're in. So we began to, with them and her husband, and then to the kids, kind of work through that because it was not healthy for any of them. I mean, she was running ragged, and he had a job where his hours where he really couldn't help. He was going to have to get a different job if he was going to be able to help with the carpooling and driving and those things. So it's just taking the time to kind of assess it, I think. And what do you and your wife really want for your family? What are your values that you really want to instill in your kids? And then taking it from there and following through with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So, and life gets obviously a lot busier as you have kids, and there's just a lot.
Oh yeah.
Like we were just discussing, that no matter how many events you're doing or lessons or this or that, it's still adding to your life. Plus, you're trying to work. Plus, you're trying to run a household and make sure there's dinner on the table and groceries done and all that. And how do you advise if there's one parent who's feeling like, gosh, I feel like we're disconnected. I feel like you're not prioritizing the relationship. And the other parent is saying something like, there's no time. Like that's just not where we are right now. Like, kind of get over it. Like, how do you advise someone in that situation?
Because I don't think you can just stop there with get over it. I mean, okay, that's going to disconnect you. That's going to make somebody feel, I don't care. I make it the point, I don't care if I connect with her or him. And so at that point, I would think really sitting down with a mentor couple or a counselor would be really good. Someone that can kind of help you work through that, can listen to both of you. And because I think what happens sometimes, we both kind of dig in, I want this, you want that, and nobody's willing to give or compromise. And there's usually always a way to make it a win. I don't want anything in a marriage to be a win-lose thing. I think the marriage loses then, and one of you loses. And how do you make it a win-win thing? And it takes work to do that. It's a lot easier to say, suck it up, but that doesn't do anything for your marriage. So I would say probably, depending on the situation, probably going to a counselor will be well worth the money you pay to do that.
Yeah, no, that's good advice. It's because it is often a delicate conversation, and it can be helpful to have a third party to help facilitate that. And
exactly.
Make sure you're not attacking one another. And that making clear that it's coming from a place of love. This isn't coming from a place
absolutely
of anything negative, and keeping the outcome in mind. Right. Go ahead.
Yeah. I get it. I've seen some moms and dads both. They're just so stressed with everything, and they feel like, okay, I can't add one more thing. And that comes off as, well, I don't have time for you, my husband or my wife. And so when it gets to that point, I think you really probably need some kind of help to get things back on track.
Yeah, no, that's so, we talked about when your child is leaving the house and, how to kind of avoid being in that situation where you're living with a stranger. Going to the very beginning of child birth and when there's a baby in the house, what would you advise new couples, or I'm sorry, couples who are new with a kid? What would you tell them, knowing, hey, this is a tough season, but it's just a season. But what do you advise them so they end up in a strong place with a strong family life, kind of out of that?
I think, I think so. I think it gives you a chance then. I mean, you're both tired. I get that. But I think you want to do some things we talk about. Make sure you just connect sometime every day. I had a lady, I was on her podcast a couple of years ago, and they had 4 kids, and she had gone through this, and she said, for about 6 months with each kid, we would meet in the kitchen at 9:00 after the kids were in bed. And she said, we were both tired, but we'd sit down, we'd have a cup of coffee or something and just talk for 10 or 15 minutes. She said that made all the difference in the world for us. The fact that he was willing to do that for me and I was willing to do that for him. She said we didn't solve world problems or maybe even things that are in our relationship, but we both showed we cared, and we won this relationship to show the other that this was valuable to us and that we were going through a hard time, and that when that ended, we were going to ramp it up again. So I would think that just don't put your marriage on the back burner. Don't because sometimes it's hard to get it back off.
Yeah. No, that's powerful. And it's easy to have this notion of romantic marriage and maybe it's, more than a notion. It's like, hey, we used to be passionate. We used to be X, Y,
Yeah,
and Z, and now we're just dead tired. And it doesn't feel that, it doesn't feel romantic at all to say, okay, we have a date at 9 p.m. every night to talk no matter what. But romantic there's different levels of what romantic
sure.
means, of course, but that gives you this connection. I think you're right, even though it sounds like, it's on my schedule. I have to schedule time. And it's like, yeah. And that doesn't mean it's not going to be meaningful. It's kind of what you make of it, but you need to set
Right.
aside that time, right? I mean,
Because if you don't, it probably ain't going to happen. And I think you mentioned, romance and so if you talk about the sexual relation, I think couples have to be willing to schedule that during those times too. Okay, whatever it is. Just so one, I think for the wife, her best sex organ is her mind, and if she knows that Saturday is the day that you've committed to, that's on your calendars, then she can keep that in her mind. So when it comes time, she's much more prepared to enjoy that and spend time with her husband. And so I think a lot of people don't like to schedule sex, but I think there's seasons that if it's going to happen and really grow your marriage, there's probably scheduling could be a big part of that to make sure that happens.
yeah, no, that's, yeah, I mean, that's, similar to what I was saying, but on a different level. I mean, it feels like not so romantic, but by the same token, hey, this is a season. You're going to have different seasons. You're going to have a season where there are no kids. You're going to have a season where the kids are gone at after school activities. You're going to have the season where you're up in the middle of the night, and kind of based on the season, make sure you're prioritizing your partner in whatever way that
Yeah.
is, and making space,
It,
right? I mean,
right. And if it's sitting at the kitchen table having coffee or 10 minutes not appealing, go sit on the couch and cuddle and spend that time together. Whatever works best for you and whatever you think, this is helping our marriage. This is making me feel like we're connecting to this season that we're going through for the first time if it's the first baby.
yeah, no, I like that. And so I want to go to one of your books, or either one, but Seven Secrets of an Awesome Marriage.
Okay.
What would be some of the more impactful strategies that you look at that are in that book? You say, gosh, guys, if you could just follow these two or three, this will really make an impact for you.
Yeah, I was kind of looking through. I think let's kind of maybe walk through some of them. But the first one is stop. And basically, it's stopping the insanities. We know that insanity is trying to do it's doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And how many times we get, oh my gosh, we could do that in marriage. It's just like, well, if she would do this would work. Well, and she's probably saying the same thing about the husband. So it's being willing to stop doing the things that aren't working. And that I think gives you a new starting point in your marriage. Connecting is really important. A lot of what we've talked about today, and listening, being present with each other. For a lot of couples, the engage part of fighting right, learning because everybody's going to have conflict, and it's either healthy or unhealthy. And honestly, most of us haven't experienced much healthy conflict. But when you really listen to each other, when you're present with each other, when you choose your words carefully, and using things like, hey, this is escalating. We need to do a timeout. It's something you've agreed on. Okay, we're going to go separate for a little bit. Then we're going to come back and try to work on this again. And like I said earlier, just being willing to compromise. Don't look at it like a win-lose. A lot of our fights in our early marriage were win-lose things. And that didn't do anything at all for our marriage. And probably that, I think the last one of fighting together for your marriage, it's being on the same team. I think when a couple gets there and they see their spouse as their biggest advocate, their biggest cheerleader, that they would do anything for me, and you fight together. We use the example that, say, if you've got, say, the problem, and usually the problem is right in the middle of the two of you, and you're fighting over solving it this way or that way. And so, you're just going, if you can just step back and stand together and put that problem in front of you, instead of saying, how would you solve it or how would you solve it? It's like, how do we solve this together? Then it changes everything, because then you're working together as a team. It doesn't change the problem, but it changes how you're working at it and how you're approaching it and how you're valuing each other in that decision. And that makes a big difference.
Oh, I imagine so. But I mean, there are situations where you disagree, and
Sure.
there's not there's often not a right answer, quote unquote. Whether it's, gosh, I think our child shouldn't have screen time today, or I think they should have half an hour. You think they should have an hour and a half. So how do you avoid that kind of win-lose situation when you're just clearly disagreeing? And yeah.
Yeah, I think compromising. I think so in that situation, maybe you say, hey, for this 2 weeks, let's do it your way. At the end of 2 weeks, let's look at it. If we think it's working, we'll keep doing it. If it's not, let's try my way. And so you learn to work together on it. And I think when you do that, you've got to be for the other person working. Just because it wasn't your idea, don't try to make it fail. Don't do something like that. Really kind of support that. And okay, yeah, we are giving them an hour and a half screen time. I think that's too much, but are there benefits here? And so really it's a way to work together in that. And I think being willing to, and so I think then the next time something comes up, and say the husband is one who did the compromise before, there's a lot better chance the wife is going to say, well, let's compromise on this. I'll compromise on this the next time, because you've proven that solving the problem is that your marriage is more important than solving the problem.
Yeah, no, that's a great way of putting it. I mean, you're showing the priority. You're saying, hey, I don't agree with what we're doing, but let's try it, and I'll try it nicely. And because at the end of the day, they're minor little blips in your marriage, right? They should be tiny, tiny, You're
not going to look back in 10 years and think, God, she was wrong about the screen time. I mean, it's like, it's something you grow through. It's a season. And so I think we can build things out of proportion too. And so choosing your battles is probably, another thing you can do. And then it's just say, hey, you've been reading stuff on this. You've been looking at it and seeing what other people have done. Yeah, let's do it your way.
I like that strategy. I think that's right on. Because when they are little battles, and often I think they come from being like a, hey, this is how I grew up. This is what I experienced, and this really worked for me. Like, I had a great childhood, so I want to make sure that our kids have the same thing too. Whereas it's not necessarily, there's more than one way. As we realize as we're raising kids, there's more than one way to do that. Right?
Yeah, and family of origin does play a big part. If you grew up and you knew growing up, my parents are doing a bad job, well, then you have a tendency to replicate that. But it's not like you're saying my parents were always right. But I think for us, it was figuring out what was good, the way I was brought up, what was good that Nancy was brought up, what did we both like, and what do we want ours to look like. And that took time, took effort. You learn more about your spouse, what went on in their home as they grew up, as the longer you're married, because certain things don't come up the first year of marriage, especially about parenting. A lot of times, people don't have a child the first year of marriage. So we're rocking along good. And then a child comes and, oh my gosh, we are not on the same page parenting, and just being able to talk through those things together.
Yeah. Yeah. You have any sort of final words or advice for parents who are, listening to this podcast right now, dads who are listening and saying, hey,
sure,
I want to avoid divorce. I want to create a strong family, strong legacy. What would you say?
Yeah, I would say that wherever you are right now, maybe you feel like I'm not doing a very good job, or maybe you feel like I'm doing a pretty good job. Just know it's a journey. And if you're not doing some things you think are the best now, there's all the chance of starting over or changing, doing some things different. Probably a conversation between the two of you will be good. Maybe if you've listened to this together, you'd say, hey, what did you hear out of that? What can we learn from that? But I would say there's always hope, and that raising kids, being a dad, being a mom, it's interesting. You don't prepare for that much. You don't usually, most of us didn't get classes in school for that. we don't get a practice kid, that we can mess up on.
Yeah.
Then God gives us the real kid. So I think just giving yourself a lot of grace, giving each other grace, and I don't think there's anything that is important as really loving your child. Sometimes that has to be tough love, sure. But when a child grows up in a home and they feel loved and they feel their parents love each other and love them, it goes a long way to raising kids that, my Nancy and I goal, probably from the time kids were probably 9 or 10, was that we would be adult friends with our kids. And making that transition that we have that now is awesome. And if we had, there's a lot of things we could have done that probably would have prevented that from happening. But they are our best friends. They're great friends. Their spouses are friends. And it's we can look back and just say, with God's help, we did an okay job, and our kids are doing well.
That's beautiful. I love that. And that really dovetails nicely with what you were saying, that first there are seasons. And so recognize that, these seasons will not last. They'll pass. It is a journey, hence all, the seasons you go through, and keeping the end in mind, where you want to go. When you have a little newborn, you're not thinking, hey, we want to be best friends, or maybe that is in your mind, but that's not super realistic when we're adults. But as they become little people and then bigger people, you start to see their personalities and say, hey, I want to guide them. I want to give them love, maybe some tough love when necessary, just so they don't, get off the tracks. But at the end of the day, my goal is to have them want to call me when they're 25 or 30 or 35 and share their joy and share their lives together. I mean, that's where we want to end up. I think that's a great way of putting it.
It's fun now and it doesn't happen a lot now. Our kids have done really well. It probably happened more early marriage for them, for both of them, that they'd come and would talk, they'd want some advice. And what we made really clear to them was when they came for advice, hey, we're going to tell you what we think, but when you leave here, you do what you think's best. And there's just because we say this is what we think, that doesn't matter. I mean, it's, you ask us, we'll tell you, but there's no strings attached here. You go do what you think is best. And I think that's how I'd treat a good friend. That's how I'd treat one of my friends. I'd say, hey, this is what I think, but you got to do what's best for you. And so that has been really fun to have that type of relationship with them.
Yeah. No, that's great. Well, Dr. Kim, I really appreciate the time. I appreciate this conversation. It was really interesting and informative and valuable. I'm going to put all your links in the show notes, but awesomemarriage.com is the website where you can jump off and learn a lot from Dr. Kim. And again, thank you for joining us here today.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun. Congratulations on what you're doing, and just wish the best for you moving forward.
Well, thank you so much. Take care.
Mm-hmm.